we are entering this like totally new world of like AI on the one hand, but then like, of course, on just the industry side on the other hand is like search and discoverability and like brand just being so critical and being so opinionated and thoughtful and not just sort of like the old way, I guess.
Hey, and thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Content Briefly. Really excited to be talking with Kasey Hickey today. She's the Senior Director of Brand and Content at a company called Attentive. If you're not familiar with Attentive, they've been around for quite a while. They're a Series E, startup. I don't say that very often. They've raised more than $800 million. They're in the SMS and email space, primarily helping retailers and D2C companies reach their customers. We talk a little bit about the product to get a sense of who exactly they're targeting, but what we really dive into is the way that Kasey distinguishes between supporting other teams and focusing on her content team's goals. That's kind of an evergreen content marketing challenge, and I really liked her perspective on it. We also talked about how disciplined she and the team are about prioritizing the work that they do. While they are very well resourced, she does not want to be just creating content for content's sake. She wants every single thing they work on to be as impactful as possible, and it was awesome to hear her describe that. And then we do get into a little bit of the brand stuff. So she's, like I mentioned, now the Director of Brand and Content. So we talk about what that means, the kind of like the Venn diagram of brand and content, what's unique, where do they overlap, that kind of stuff. Overall, a conversation that I really enjoyed, and I hope you do too. This episode of Content Briefly is brought to you by our friends at Shelf. Shelf is the go-to B2B content agency for niche industries, like really niche industries. Take Reinhard, one of Shelf's talented writers, as an example. He has a glorious beard and knows more about the U.S. sales tax nexus obligations than just about anyone, minus the CEOs of the tax compliance companies he writes for, and even that is debatable. Strategy, words, distribution. Shelf takes care of everything. Use Shelf's earned experience to your advantage across these niche industries. Supply chain, like freight, logistics, customs compliance, 3PL and 4PL. Regulations and compliance, like SOC 2, ISO, HIPAA, ESG, and ITGC. Cloud, like DevOps, FinOps, DRaaS, IaaS, BaaS, and other asses. And finance, revolving finance, AR, AP, tax, and VAT compliance. Any other business that worries no writer will ever understand you? Shelf will. Want a live demo of Shelf's refined deep research methodology? Use the link in the show notes to book a call with Shelf's founder, Hila. She'll ask you so many questions your eyes will bleed. Thanks so much to Shelf for supporting Superpad. Content Briefly is produced by our friends at Minutia. To learn more about their podcast production service, as well as their other adaptive content marketing services, check out minutia.com in the show notes. Hey everybody, Jimmy from Superpath here today with another episode of Content Briefly. Very excited to be chatting with Kasey Hickey, Senior Director of Brand and Content. That's going to be one of my first questions at Attentive. Kasey, thank you so much for being here. Would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and some of the work you've been up to over the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's so great to be on this podcast, Jimmy, and finally talk in real life.
I agree.
Yeah, I am for sure. Super stoked to be here. Like you mentioned, I'm Senior Director of Brand and Content. It's actually a newer, expanded role that I'm taking on. I've been actually leading content marketing at Attentive for almost 4 years now, which, you know, if you've worked at a startup, feels like forever. And it's been a real fun ride. Of course, never a dull day. Came in here to develop, grow, and mentor a content team, really help establish like what content does at Attentive, content not just as a service, but as a program. And, you know, been a key driver of many of our campaigns, some of the most impactful business, oriented campaigns, our holiday marketing campaigns, research and reports, of course, a lot of sales enablement, and our kind of ongoing day-to-day editorial calendar.
Okay, so many questions based on what you just said. Maybe first though, would you just give us a brief overview of Attentive? Kind of what's the product? Who's your customer?
Yeah, so Attentive started as an SMS marketing platform. A couple of years ago, we've expanded into email. And now we've really leaned into AI as a key differentiator. So we say that we are an AI-powered mobile marketing platform that delivers really highly personalized experiences. to consumers. So our customers are primarily retail brands, also D2C mid-market brands. But ultimately, we are in the business of helping businesses better communicate, engage, and convert their customers.
Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, I was curious about the D2C thing because I saw when I was on the site this morning, the Black Friday, Cyber Monday stuff going on. We're recording, let's see, September 10th. So I'm guessing like that's probably a big focus for the next 2.5 months for you, right?
Yeah, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is our Super Bowl. It's, the biggest business moment for many of our customers. I said that retail is a big category for us, but we work with a lot of different types of brands. We're also in the travel and hospitality space, media and entertainment. So we also, we have a vertical focused business as well. But yes, we work with a ton of massive, massive retailers, and this is their huge moment. I will say that my team spends our summer working on our holiday campaign. And so that launched. Thank goodness. We are all very relieved. And now we're continuing, obviously, to drip out content that's super relevant, both for our existing customers. We work really closely with our customer success team to make sure that all of our guidance and recommendations and best practices are aligned. And then, of course, with prospects who some of them are looking to make a switch. And we really want to highlight how we can help them really ramp up quickly and drive a massive business impact.
I love that. Okay, you mentioned you've been leading content there for 4 years. Could you give us,
Yeah.
I know it's probably difficult to sum up 4 years in a minute or two, but could you give us a taste of, okay, you arrive at Attentive, what's going on with content, and then, excuse me, give us kind of an overview of what's happening now?
Yeah, totally. So when I first joined Attentive, there was an existing team in place, and I was really hired to help the team really like up level how they operate. So I would say that, like at a lot of companies, probably content starts out as a service provider. Like sales needs a case study, events needs a deck. Somebody needs to write some website copy, and so the team was really, really reactive. Like everything was just like somebody asked me for something, so I'm going to do it because they told me. So a lot of what I've done is actually shift that perception of content just being like a service provider and more of a partner and a thought leader. A content to me is obviously a really powerful lever, and you can use it in so many different ways. But I think at the end of the day, the biggest hurdle for us was to get to that point where we developed really strong cross-functional relationships where instead of coming to us and saying like, well, we just need another white paper, people would come to us and say like, hey, we're having this problem or this challenge, and let's figure out how do we solve this problem with content. And then I will say when I first started, we were using WordPress, and we were taking on a re-platform, and as part of that, just like reimagining like our website presence. So a huge part of my role was also really figuring out how do we build more of our presence on the internet, and use SEO as really a really powerful lever. So building out that function was also a big part of my role as well.
Okay, that's so interesting. As when you were introducing yourself, I had written down a note that I wanted to ask you about content as a program versus content as a service,
Yeah.
which you just started getting into, and I would love to dive a little bit deeper into that because this comes up all the time. Like in the Slack group, for example, like this is a common theme that comes up every now and then, where a content person feels like they or their team is just being stretched a little thin, and they have their own goals, but it's hard to work towards those when there's all these requests coming in. But there's this balance to strike where if content is needed across the org, that's great, and it's great to support other teams because they are also working in general towards the same goals that you are, like try to get more customers in the door. Can you talk a little bit about how you maintain that balance? I mean, I could imagine like a really imagine like a spreadsheet. It's like how much of a resource goes to the service, how much goes to our own programs. I'm sure it's probably not quite that clean and simple, but how do you think about kind of maintaining that balance?
Yeah, totally. And that's a great question. And I hired a principal copywriter who has been a phenomenal leader and partner on the service end. One of the things that I really care deeply about is not calling it service, but calling it support. And so,
I like that.
again, kind of like positioning her as a partner as opposed to a service provider, I think is really important. I know that's like internal branding, but I think it's been really critical for us to really create an intake process that isn't just like, here's the deadline, here's what I need, do it. And more like,
Yeah.
here's what I'm looking for, here's what I'm thinking about. I've started maybe like a rough draft or a skeleton. I need to, like up level this, or this is the goal that we're trying to hit. And that the part of our intake process is actually like working with the requester to understand their request and then to figure out the right, content solution. And I think there's also a balance too of something that takes a lot of thought, a lot of flow time, and is really, really critical to the business versus something where we can actually, and I'm sure you'll ask me questions about this, but where we can rely on like an AI partner to help the person get as close as possible to what they're looking for and where we're coming in as polish. I think a lot of our work has also been to create guidelines and standards and, establish the tools that other people can use where again, if something's not going to be seen by every single customer or if we're not publishing it on our website, we can give people like templates and guidelines and empower them to do some of that work as well. We can make it easier for them. But at the end of the day, we haven't figured it all out. I don't think anybody has. Because we are still the people who everyone comes to when they need a piece of content. And sometimes they don't come to us and we wish they did. So yeah, there's that too.
That's interesting. How is the company structured? Like, are all the content folks centralized on your team? Like in some companies, there might be content people spread out across different parts of the org and there's sort of like a matrix thing happening. What does that look like at Attentive?
Yeah, so we do have a tech writing team and we have a customer education team, and they sit within the customer success org. So that content, like our help center, for example, is owned by them. But everything that we create from a marketing perspective does live within my team. That doesn't mean that we're the only people writing content. Like our growth marketing folks are writing nurture emails. Product marketing creates content. But we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out the right processes and frameworks for people where, for example, like we have a web copy process that's been established in the last 2 years, I would say, where, there was a time where like product marketing would just write web copy and then we'd publish it. And now, we have a framework and a process for that. We do have product marketers who are writing case studies. So it's not all on my team, but I would say a good chunk of all marketing content goes through my team.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah. Is it fair to say that creating a little bit of healthy friction is actually good for your role in supporting other parts of the org? Right? Like you kind of mentioned helping them flesh out their own ideas. Cause I could imagine like, what if sales comes to you and says, hey, we need some sales enablement, and you say, okay, we'll do it. And then they're like, oh, that was easy. We'll just do that more often.
Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe healthy friction isn't the right word, but creating some good process around that feels like a key part of creating a boundary for your own team, but then also like helping the other teams understand that you have other things to do besides support them.
Yeah, for sure. I love hearing from sales and trying to figure out like where there are gaps. To be honest with you, we have created so much content, and one of our biggest challenges has been making sure that it's packaged and distributed in the most effective way and that people realize that it even exists. So we launched a resource center I think it was about a year ago. And so we basically we have a blog, we have like a guides and reports section of our website. And then we created this resource hub that was like another way to package content up. And we worked really closely with sales and CS to really understand like what are the types of questions they get most often, like what are kind of like the core themes of their conversations. And then like, how can we basically cross pollinate a lot of the content that already exists? Like we have, case studies and videos and reports and guides and checklists and blog posts that are like all on the theme of why SMS as an example. And
Mm,
obviously for, conversations that sales is having with prospects that are like much newer to that channel, like it's great to have all that in one place. Then we need to make sure that that's reflected in HighSpot as well. Um, and so I think that yes, like it's good to have a healthy friction in the sense that like sometimes we say no, but so many times we're like, oh, you're asking me for this. We have like these four things that are very similar. And then in that back and forth, it also helps us uncover like, okay, but they're looking for something really specific that might be missing. And then we either can optimize an existing piece of content, we get an idea for how we can like better distribute this content and frame it up for them. Or we're like, oh, actually, like this is an opportunity. We need to create something that new. We sync up with our product marketing team because like maybe there's a way that we're like not telling the product story that we should be. So I think a lot of it comes from these conversations too. I never want to just like straight up say no to people. I always want to get down to like the nuts and bolts of like what is it you're really asking for. And sometimes it's like a discoverability problem. Sometimes it's a gap. And sometimes it's just like how they're talking about something and how we're talking about something. And we need to like bridge those things together.
yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like what you're describing sounds to me like a challenge that larger companies probably have more so than smaller companies. I don't know exactly how big Attentive is, but as I was doing my pre-podcast research, I saw that the
Mm-hmm.
company's like Series E has raised like 800 something $1 million. I mean, there's like, well, one, the company's been around for a long time, you know,
Mm-hmm.
two, well resourced. But then as the company grows, that there's more people, there's more opportunities for communication to either strengthen the business or create gaps. So it's just
Yeah.
interesting. I'm just an observation, just like those challenges may only appear at a certain stage in the company's life cycle, and for younger companies, those gaps may not have appeared yet.
Yeah, I will say you mentioned well resourced, and I do feel like we are a bigger company. But that said, our content team is pretty small, and we are ruthless prioritizers. Like when I look at a piece of content or an opportunity, a project, whatever it is, I'm always like, what is the potential impact of this? What's the risk in not doing this? And how resource intensive will it be? And I
Yeah.
am constantly like reshuffling those things. And of course, like as content marketers, like we have to be really agile. Something's happening in the industry, our customers need to know about it. We need to make sure that our customers know that we're on top of it. And so I can't just be like, well, we're working on this thing, so like we don't have time. But some of these projects, like, like our holiday campaign, we can't, we can't just say, no, we're not going to do a holiday campaign this
Right,
year.
right.
And there's so many, of course, moving parts with design, with our growth marketing team. So I think, my team, and I think that this was one of the questions you had mentioned, but my team is only two full-time content marketers.
Oh, okay. That's quite a bit smaller than I was expecting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so there's two full-time content marketers, senior content marketing managers. We have a senior content marketing manager her whole job is SEO. And she works across the entire website. So not just content, but our entire web presence. We work with an SEO agency. I'm a principal copywriter, one single copywriter for all.
Wow.
She's amazing. So we're quite small and we have to prioritize a lot. We can simply not say yes to everything that we're asked to do.
Yeah. Okay. That's so interesting. Actually, I wrote a blog post that I just published on the Superpath blog yesterday. And
I
one of the
just
things,
read it. I know which one you're talking
oh,
about.
yeah. Well, I just find it interesting. Like, more money does not necessarily equal better content. And in fact, well resourced is a challenge of its own,
Mhm.
So actually having a small team that forces you to prioritize. I mean, one, it just it reinforces the discipline, right, to like make sure everyone's working on like the most impactful things. But two, probably saves some headaches down the road. Like
Yep.
if you do too much net new just because you have the ability to do it, you know, what happened like 2 years from now? Like, do you have technical
Yep.
SEO problems and site architecture problems, and does everything need to be refreshed because the rankings have dropped? And like it just creates this whole new discussion that could potentially be avoided by just being more disciplined with your prioritization, which is really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like there's like this quote that I've seen heard in the past of like, creativity needs boundaries and like creativity thrives in boundaries. And I do think there's something to that of knowing that I always tell my team, like, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And so knowing which things are going to drive the biggest impact is so critical. And we've seen this because, there were times when we were publishing more and what we were seeing was like, hey, like this piece of content, we spent this many time, this much time writing it. We had like 7 people review it. We published it. And then like 100 people read it,
Yeah,
and
right.
then, so we've just been getting better and better at attuning to like, what is the most important content that we could be creating? And like, let's not waste our time on anything that doesn't meet this threshold. And I think over time, we've gotten better at kind of sussing that out and asking all the right questions in the brief process where we've shut things down, where we're like, you know what, there's nothing interesting here. This has already been said before. We don't have anything unique to offer here. And then we just say no, we just don't do it. So
That's so cool. It's so rare, at least in my own personal experience, it's so rare to come across a project and then just say, no, I'm not going to do it. Like just removing something from your to-do list is so incredibly refreshing, especially if you've come into it and assess like, do I really need to do this? Is it just another task on my list? Probably something we could all, companies and individuals alike, learn from there. I am curious about the brand component of your job. I'm imagining a Venn diagram with brand on one
mhm.
side, content on the other. There's some overlap, and then there's quite a bit that's not. Brand
Yeah.
is its own thing. Also, could you talk a little bit about what brand means in the context of your role?
Yeah, totally. So I'm super excited. This is a totally new role, new transition for me, and so we're actually bringing our content and brand design teams together. The thing that's interesting to me is that brand has always been such a critical differentiator for companies, but increasingly, I think it's becoming even more so. So to me, it's that overlap between, the company narrative and the storytelling and how you show up. But it's not just words and design. It really is a reflection of your entire team's interactions, your companies and, touch points. So I think it's an interesting question because I think to a certain extent, everybody at the company owns brand, but we are just the ones that help like shepherd and shape it along and give it sort of like the feel. And we do that through visuals, through words, obviously. But I don't think brand is like, oh, it lives over here with this one
Right.
team. But I think that way about content too, is like content is not just, like the posts that you publish. It's so much a reflection of who you are as a company and how you think about the world and the industry around you. So yeah, it's really exciting. And I'm super new to it. It's something I've done before in other roles, but I'm really excited to get more closer to that area.
Yeah, that's really cool. So are there people on your team, I guess would be the right way to phrase it, that are thinking more about visuals, design, other kind of brand things, not just text content is what I was going to say. That sounds demeaning. I mean
Oh
like
yeah.
thinking about things besides the content itself.
Yeah, so we have a full brand design team, and I'll plug that I'm actually hiring for a director of brand design and creative. So
Oh,
super
cool.
excited to find somebody awesome there. But yeah, one of the things that I love about Attentive is that we have a really strong brand, and it's something that we're really known for in the B2B space. Like we do things in a really creative, kind of consumer way. And we also are very intentional about our brand. In a sea of sort of like purple and blue tech companies, we're yellow and we're very intentional about it. And our tone and our ethos is like very friendly, very conversational. And that comes through like all of the things that we do, both online and in person. We do a ton of in person events. And so I'm super excited to be hiring somebody at this point in time because we are entering this like totally new world of like AI on the one hand, but then like of course on just the industry side on the other hand is like search and discoverability and like brand just being so critical and being so opinionated and thoughtful and not just sort of like the old way, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. I'm really glad you mentioned that actually, because one of the things I was going to ask you about was competition in your space. This is not a world I know well. I'm assuming there's other companies who offer products that do roughly similar things. There's only, so many keywords. There's only so many spots on a SERP. Brand
Yep.
feels like the differentiator. Like that can be the way that Attentive or other companies too in different spaces can set
Yep.
themselves apart. Like make sure that their potential customers remember them when it comes time to make that decision, or kind of stay in the orbit. I mean, maybe it takes a long time, could take years. Stay in the orbit of
Yeah.
Attentive through content, events, social, freemium
Yeah.
products, or whatever else until the time comes.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, of course, like, when I think about content and what the things that kind of like are our secret sauce, obviously like, unique insights, like our subject matter expertise, like our data, all of those things are like original to us. But beyond that, exactly what you said, like we differentiate as a brand and it's such a mushy thing. It's like we make people feel, the campaigns that they remember, the interactions that they've had with their customer success manager. All of those things definitely play into it. And I'm a big believer in like, you're not going to win in a feature war, like alone, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
everyone's just going to keep building and building and building. And we're in such a dynamic tech environment where those innovations are happening really, really quickly. And like by the time you're working on something, like someone else is definitely already working on something similar, trying to figure it out. So it's like, where can you pull a big lever? Brand.
Yeah, that's really
And it can
cool.
help, like those two things have to lock together. It's like you have to have the innovation and the technology and those differentiators, but without brand, then you're just in a feature war with like other people.
Right. That's so interesting. To be honest, brand is not something I have really no experience in. Like, and it always has always felt kind of like you said, like a little squishy. But then when you see it, it's like, oh, that's it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like this company
Yeah.
has done it, but then behind the scenes, I'm guessing it's like a lot of thought and effort has gone into creating that experience for the person on the other end. So, like from your perspective, is that brand guidelines, style guide, like that
Yeah.
type of stuff? Is that does that make up the kind of the backbone of what brand ultimately becomes when it's public facing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it means that like a customer who interacts with their customer success manager, comes to our website, goes to an event from us, attends a webinar, like when they're having all these engagements with us, like they come away feeling like one, it's like a consistent experience and like we are, different facets of the same person, right? I guess it's tone, right? It's like our brand voice, like how we show up is like always consistent, but like we shift a little bit depending on the context, right? Like if there's a different tone on our social media. If you attend one of our events, like you get like a slightly different flavor, but at the end of the day, like everything should feel like attentive. And I do feel like, people don't come up to me at conferences and say like, I read that one blog post you did about like how to use, how to better use segmentation. But they do come up to me and they say like, oh my God, this one campaign that you guys did, like I still remember it was so
Oh, wow.
cool. And it's like that experience that they remember, and it's like the feeling that they're left with. That's really powerful, and why we keep investing the resources and doing things like that. Because they are so meaningful, and because they leave that, to your point, lasting impression.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I guess I hadn't really considered this, but you'll probably make an impression either way. There's the sort of accidental way, and then there's the deliberate way. And maybe the deliberate way is
Yes.
that's the brand.
Yes, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's like we think about all the copy and all the visuals and how they work together. And if we're doing a report online, we're thinking about like, how does this show up in an in person experience? And how, the swag at our events is reflective of our brand, as an
Yeah,
example. Um, so I think it's all those little bits that add up.
I love it. That's so cool. Um, we've covered a lot. I feel like we could cover another hour's worth of stuff. If you're open to it, Kasey, maybe we do a part 2 sometime where we dive into some of the metrics, the reporting, all of that good stuff. Because I feel like that's probably a whole nother world of stuff that that we could dive into.
It's a whole world of stuff. Yeah, we don't do things unless we're measuring them in one way or another.
Okay, well, if you're open to it, one thing we've been doing is I record a podcast and then I set a reminder for 1 year, and then I reach back out, and then I'm starting to check in with people now that we've been doing this for a while, so that we can continue conversations and then like kind of check in on things we talked
Yeah,
about last
I love
time.
it. I love it. And I love your
Um,
last post. The whole doing more with less super resonates with me. Like this idea that we're just like these hamsters in a wheel, just like churning, 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 churning. I think about myself and I'm like, I do not check a company's website every day to see what their new blog
yeah,
post
yeah,
is.
right.
And like 80% of what they publish is probably not being read. And so like it's about that differentiation. And like I'd rather spend, 3 weeks working on a piece of really phenomenal content than just like churn something out just to say we did it.
Totally. Yeah, the content landscape has just changed so much. Like it wasn't that long ago that there was a lot of grumbling about do more with less, and now I kind of feel like actually do more with less is it's kind of an opportunity. I mean, there are casualties to it, like the layoffs, the budget cuts, like that stuff is really tough. Um, but the do more with less thing is sort of an opportunity to let people, you know, kind of have more ownership over the projects that they work on. Think kind of like you described earlier, like really hard about what is worth my time. Like what should we be
Mm-hmm.
doing? Not just like, wow, we've got budget and a list of keywords. Let's go, you know? Um,
Yeah. And think about the recipient of all this content. Like they're getting like 50,000 emails from you that all sound the same. They're seeing your, it's like, just put yourself in their shoes. I think being like really buyer oriented and customer focused is so critical. It's like, read this piece of content. Like, would you care?
right,
If
right.
it doesn't resonate with you, like, why should somebody else care?
Totally. Totally. Um, Kasey, where can we send people to connect with you? We'll obviously link to Attentive. Would encourage people to go
Yeah.
check out the content, see what it's like now that you've kind of heard the behind the scenes. We'll link to your job opening too, if it's still
Yeah.
open.
Awesome.
We'll
Yeah.
put that in there. And then for you personally, LinkedIn, Twitter, personal website, or anywhere else we can send folks?
Yeah. LinkedIn is great. I'm not much of a Twitter user these days, but it
That's so
still
funny.
still lives in the archives, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I've always asked people like, where should we link? And everyone used to say Twitter, and now nobody says Twitter. So I guess we should just ask people, what's your LinkedIn handle?
Yeah. LinkedIn is great. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn.
Cool. We'll make sure there's a link in the show notes to your LinkedIn. And Kasey, thank you so much. Seriously, amazing to meet you. You've been very generous with your time and your wisdom, so we really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jimmy. It was great to connect.
Awesome. Take care.
You too. Bye.